which is the entrepreneurial spirit.
That's an inventor's greatest dream is that their inventions are so successful that they are one day taken for granted. Nobody thinks of Amazon as an invention anymore. Nobody thinks of customer reviews as an invention. We pioneered customer reviews, but now they're so commonplace. Same thing with one-click shopping and so on.
Yeah.
But that's a compliment. That's how, you invent something that's so used, so beneficially used by so many people that they take it for granted.
I don't know about nobody. Every time I use Amazon, I'm still amazed. How does this work? The logistics.
Well, that proves you're a very curious explorer.
All right. Back to rockets. Timeline. You said 2024. As it stands now, are both the first test launch and the launch of Escapade Explorers to Mars still possible
in 2024? Yeah, I think so. For sure, the first launch, and then we'll see if Escapade goes on that or not. I think that the first launch for sure, and I hope Escapade too.
Hope.
Well, I just don't know which mission it's actually going to be slated on. Sure. So we also have other things that might go on that first mission.
Oh, I got it. But you're optimistic that the launches will still...
Oh, the first launch, I'm very optimistic that the first launch of New Glenn will be in 2024. And I'm just not 100% certain what payload will be on that first launch.
Are you nervous about it?
Are you kidding? I'm extremely nervous about it.
Oh, man.
100%. Every launch I go to, for New Shepard, for other vehicles too, I'm always nervous for these launches. But yes, for sure. A first launch, to have no nervousness about that would be, some sign of derangement, I think. So,
well, I got to visit the launch pad. It's pretty, it's epic.
We have done a tremendous amount of ground testing, a tremendous amount of simulation. So, a lot of the problems that we might find in flight have been resolved, but there are some problems you can only find in flight. So, cross your fingers. I guarantee you'll have fun watching it no matter what happens.
100%. When the thing is fully assembled, it comes up.
Yeah, the transporter erector, the transporter erector for a rocket of this scale is extraordinary.
That's an incredible machine.
The vehicle travels out horizontally and then kind of comes up
over a few hours.
It's a beautiful thing to watch.
Speaking of which, if that makes you nervous, I don't know if you remember, but you were aboard New Shepard on its first crewed flight. How was that experience? Were you terrified then?
Strangely, I wasn't.
You ride the rocket.
It's
less nerve-wracking?
true.
Okay.
I've watched other people ride in the rocket, and I'm more nervous than when I was inside the rocket myself. It was a difficult conversation to have with my mother when I told her I was going to go on the first one. Yeah. And not only was I going to go, but I was going to bring my brother too. This is a tough conversation to have with a mom. And
there's a long pause. You told her.
She's like, both of you? And it was an incredible experience. And we were laughing inside the capsule, and, we're not nervous. The people on the ground were very nervous for us. It was actually one of the most emotionally powerful parts of the experience. It happened even before the flight. At 4:30 in the morning, brother and I are getting ready to go to the launch site, and Lauren is going to take us there in her helicopter, and we're getting ready to leave. And we go outside the ranch house there in West Texas, where the launch facility is. And all of our family, my kids and my brother's kids, and our parents and close friends are assembled there, and they're saying goodbye to us, but they're kind of saying, maybe they think they're saying goodbye to us forever. Mm-hmm. And, we might not have felt that way, but it was obvious from their faces how nervous they were that they felt that way. And it was sort of powerful because it allowed us to see, it was almost like attending your own memorial service or something. Like you could feel how loved you were in that moment. And it was really amazing.
Yeah. And there's just a epic nature to it too.
The ascent, the floating in zero gravity, I'll tell you something very interesting. Zero gravity feels very natural. I don't know if it's because it's like return to the womb.
You just confirmed you're an alien, but that's I think that's what you just said.
It feels so natural to be in zero G. It was really interesting. And then what people talk about, the overview effect and seeing Earth from space, I had that feeling very powerfully. I think everyone did. You see how fragile the Earth is. If you're not an environmentalist, it will make you one. The great Jim Lovell quote, he looked back at the Earth from space and he said he realized you don't go to heaven when you die, you go to heaven when you're born. And it's just, that's the feeling that people get when they're in space. You see all this blackness, all this nothingness, and there's one gem of life, and it's Earth.
It is a gem. What you've talked a lot about decision making throughout your time with Amazon. What was that decision like to be the first to ride New Shepherd? Like what before you talk to your mom,
Yeah,
what the pros and cons? Like actually as one human being, as a leader of a company, um, on all fronts. Like what was that decision making like?
I decided that first of all, I knew the vehicle extremely well. I know the team who built it. I know the vehicle. Um, I'm very comfortable with the escape system. We put as much effort into the escape system on that vehicle as we put into all the rest of the vehicle combined. It's one of the hardest pieces of engineering in the entire New Shepard architecture.
Can you actually describe what do you mean by escape system? What's involved?
We have a solid rocket motor in the base of the crew capsule so that if anything goes wrong on ascent, while the main rocket engine is firing, we can ignite this solid rocket motor in the base of the crew capsule and escape from the booster. It's a very challenging system to build, design, validate, test, all of these things. It is the reason that I am comfortable letting anyone go on New Shepard. So the the booster is as safe and reliable as we can make it, but um, we are harnessing. Whenever you're talking about rocket engines, I don't care what rocket engine you're talking about, you are harnessing such vast power in such a small, compact geometric space. The power density is so enormous that it is impossible to ever be sure that nothing will go wrong. And so the only way to improve safety is to have an escape system. And and historically, human-rated rockets, have had escape systems. Only the space shuttle did not. And but Apollo had one. All of the previous, Gemini, etc. They all had escape systems. And we have on New Shepard unusual escapes. Most escape systems are towers. We have a pusher escape system. So the solid rocket motor is actually embedded in the base of the crew capsule and it pushes. And it's reusable in the sense that if we don't use it, so if we have a nominal mission, we land with it. The tower systems have to be ejected at a certain point in the mission. And so they get wasted even in a nominal mission. And so again, cost really matters on these things. So we figured out how to have the escape system be a reusable, in the event that it's not used, you can reuse it, and have it be a pusher system. It's a very sophisticated thing. So I knew these things. You asked me about my decision to go. And so I know the vehicle very well. I know the people who designed it. I had great trust in them, and in the engineering that we did. And I thought to myself, look, if I am not ready to go, then I wouldn't want anyone to go. A tourism vehicle has to be designed, in my view, to be as safe as one can make it. You can't make it perfectly safe; it's impossible. But you just have to. People will do things. People take risk. They climb mountains. They skydive. They do deep underwater scuba diving and so on. People are okay taking risk. You can't eliminate the risk, but it is something, because it's a tourism vehicle. You have to do your utmost to eliminate those risks. And I felt very good about the system. I think it's one of the reasons I was so calm inside. Maybe others weren't as calm. They didn't know as much about it as I did.
Who was in charge of engaging the escape system? Did you have?
It's automated.
Okay.
The escape system
I was visualizing
is completely automated. Automated is better because it can react so much faster.
So yeah, for tourism, rockets, safety is a huge priority. For space exploration, also, but a tiny, a delta less.
Yes, I mean, I think for if you're doing, there are human activities where we tolerate more risk. If you're saving somebody's life, if you are, engaging in real exploration, these are things where I personally think we would accept more risk, in part because you have to.
Is there a part of you that's frustrated by the rate of progress in Blue Origin?
Blue Origin needs to be much faster, and it's one of the reasons that I left my role as the CEO of Amazon a couple of years ago. I wanted to come in and Blue Origin needs me right now, and so I had always, when I was the CEO of Amazon, my point of view on this is if I'm the CEO of a publicly traded company, it's going to get my full attention, and I really, it's just how I think about things. It was very important to me. I felt I had an obligation to all the stakeholders at Amazon to do that. And so having, turned the CEO, I'm still the executive chair there, but I've turned the CEO role over. And the reason, the primary reason I did that is so that I could spend time on Blue Origin, adding some, energy, some sense of urgency. We need to move much faster, and we're going to.
What are the ways to speed it up? So I mean, there's you've talked a lot of different ways to sort of at Amazon, removing barriers for progress, sort of distributing, making everybody autonomous and self-reliant in terms all those kinds of things. Is that apply at Blue Origin, or is
It does apply. I know I'm leading this directly. We are going to become the world's most decisive company across any industry. And so, at Amazon, for ever since the beginning, I said we're going to become the world's most customer obsessed company.
Mhm.
And no matter the industry, like one day people are going to come to Amazon from the healthcare industry and want to know, how are you so customer obsessed? How do you actually not just pay lip service to that, but actually do that? Um, and from, all different industries should come on to study us to see how we accomplish that. And the analogous thing at Blue Origin, and what will help us move faster, is we're going to become the world's most decisive company. We're going to get really good at taking appropriate technology risk, making those decisions quickly, being bold on those things. That's what, and having the right culture that supports that. You need people to be ambitious, technically ambitious. If there are 5 ways to do something, we'll study them, but let's study them very quickly and make a decision. We can always change our mind. It doesn't, changing your mind I talk about one-way doors and two-way doors. Most decisions are two-way doors.
Can you explain that? Because I love that metaphor.
If you make the wrong decision, if it's a two-way door decision, you walk out the door, you pick a door, you walk out, you spend a little time there. It turns out to be the wrong decision. You can come back in and pick another door. Some decisions are so consequential and so important and so hard to reverse that they really are one-way door decisions. You go in that door, you're not coming back. And those decisions have to be made very deliberately, very carefully. If you can think of yet another way to analyze the decision, you should slow down and do that. So, when I was CEO of Amazon, I often found myself in the position of being the chief slowdown officer,
Mm-hmm.
because somebody would be bringing me a one-way door decision. And it's okay. I can think of 3 more ways to analyze that. So let's go do that, because we are not going to be able to reverse this one easily. Maybe you can reverse it, but it's going to be very costly and very time consuming. We really have to get this one right from the beginning. And what happens, unfortunately, in companies, what can happen is that you have a one size fits all decision making process where you end up using the heavyweight process on all
For
decisions,
everything, yeah.
including the lightweight ones, the two-way door decisions. Two-way door decisions should mostly be made by single individuals or by very small teams deep in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And one-way door decisions are the ones that are the irreversible ones. Those are the ones that should be elevated up to, the senior most executives, who should slow them down and make sure that the right thing is being done.
Yeah, I mean, part of the skill here is to know the difference between one way and two way. I think you mentioned,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, I think you mentioned Amazon Prime, the decision to sort of create Amazon Prime as a one way door. I mean, it's unclear if it is or not, but it probably is, and it's a really big risk to go there.
There are a bunch of decisions like that are, changing the decision is going to be very, very complicated. Some of them are technical decisions too, because some technical decisions are like quick drying cement. If you're going to, once you make them, it gets really hard. I mean, choosing which propellants to use in a vehicle, selecting LNG for the booster stage and selecting hydrogen for the upper stage, that has turned out to be a very good decision. But if you changed your mind, that would be a very big setback.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
So that's the kind of decision you scrutinize very, very carefully. Other things just aren't like that. Most decisions are not that way. Most decisions should be made by single individuals, but they need and done quickly, in the full understanding that you can always change your mind.
Yeah, one of the things I really liked, perhaps it's not two-way door decisions, is I disagree and commit phrase. So don't. So somebody brings up an idea to you. If it's a two-way door, you state that you don't understand enough to agree, but you still back them. I mean, I'd love for
Well,
you to explain it. I'm
yeah,
gonna start using
disagree and
that.
commit is a really important principle that saves a lot of arguing.
Yeah,
So,
I'm gonna use that in my personal life. I disagree, but commit.
like, it's very common in any endeavor in life, in
Yeah.
business, and anybody where you have teammates. You have a teammate and the two of you disagree.
Yeah.
At some point you have to make a decision. And, in companies, we tend to organize hierarchically. So there's this, whoever's the more senior person ultimately gets to make the decision. So ultimately the CEO gets to make that decision. and the CEO may not always make the decision that they agree with. So like, I would be the one who would disagree and commit. One of my direct reports would very much want to do something in a particular way. I would think it was a bad idea. I would explain my point of view. They would say, Jeff, I think you're wrong, and here's why. And we would go back and forth. And I would often say, you know what? I don't think you're right, but I'm going to gamble with you. And you're closer to the ground truth than I am. I've known you for 20 years. You have great judgment. I don't know that I'm right either. Not really, not for sure. All these decisions are complicated. Let's do it your way. But at least then you've made a decision. And I'm agreeing to commit to that decision. So I'm not going to be second guessing it. I'm not going to be sniping at it. I'm not going to be saying, I told you so. I'm going to try actively to help make sure it works. That's a really important teammate behavior. There's so many ways that dispute resolution is a really interesting thing on teams. And there are so many ways when two people disagree about something, I'm assuming like the case where everybody's well-intentioned. They just have a very different opinion about what the right decision is. And we have in our society and inside companies, we have a bunch of mechanisms that we use to resolve these kinds of disputes. A lot of them are, I think, really bad. So an example of a really bad way of coming to agreement is compromise. So compromise, look, we're in a room here and I could say, Lex, how tall do you think this ceiling is? And you'd be like, I don't know, Jeff, maybe 12 feet tall. And I would say, I think it's 11 feet tall. Yeah. And then we'd say, you know what, let's just call it 11 and a half feet. That's compromise. Yeah. Instead of the right thing to do is, to get a tape measure or figure out some way of actually measuring, but getting that tape measure and figure out how to get it to the top of the ceiling and all these things, that requires energy. Compromise, the advantage of compromise as a resolution mechanism is that it's low energy, but it doesn't lead to truth. And so in things like the height of the ceiling, where truth is a knowable thing, you shouldn't allow compromise to be used when you can know the truth. Another really bad resolution mechanism that happens all the time is just who's more stubborn. Yeah. This is also, let's say two executives who disagree, and they just have a war of attrition. And whichever one gets exhausted first capitulates to the other one. Again, you haven't arrived at truth. And this is very demoralizing. So, this is where escalation, I try to ask people who, on my team, to say, never get to a point where you are resolving something by, who gets exhausted first. Escalate that. I'll help you make the decision. Because that's so de-energizing and such a terrible, lousy way to make a decision.
So you want to get to the resolution as quickly as possible because that ultimately leads to a high velocity of the decision.
Yes, and you want to try to get as close to truth as possible. Yeah. So you want, exhausting the other person is not truth-seeking.
Yes.
And compromise is not truth-seeking. So, it doesn't mean, and there are a lot of cases where no one knows the real truth, and that's where disagree and commit can come in. But it's escalation is better than war of attrition. Escalate to your boss and say, hey, we can't agree on this. We like each other. We're respectful of each other, but we strongly disagree with each other. We need you to, make a decision here so we can move forward. But decisiveness, moving forward quickly on decisions, as quickly as you responsibly can, is how you increase velocity. Most of what slows things down is taking too long to make decisions at all scale levels. So it has to be part of the culture to get high velocity. Amazon has 1.5 million people, and the company is still fast. We're still decisive. We're still quick. And that's because the culture supports that.
At every scale in a distributed way,
yes.
Trying to maximize the velocity of decisions.
Exactly.
You've mentioned the lunar program. Let me ask you about that.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there, and you haven't really talked about it much. So in addition to the Artemis program,
sure, is not truth-seeking. So, it doesn't mean, and there are a lot of cases where no one knows the real truth, and that's where disagree and commit can come in. But it's escalation is better than war of attrition. Escalate to your boss and say, hey, we can't agree on this. We like each other. We're respectful of each other, but we strongly disagree with each other. We need you to, make a decision here so we can move forward. But decisiveness, moving forward quickly on decisions, as quickly as you responsibly can, is how you increase velocity. Most of what slows things down is taking too long to make decisions at all scale levels. So it has to be part of the culture to get high velocity. Amazon has 1.5 million people, and the company is still fast. We're still decisive. We're still quick. And that's because the culture supports that.
At every scale in a distributed way, trying to
Yes,
maximize the velocity of decisions.
exactly.
You've mentioned the lunar program. Let me ask you about that.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot going on there, and you haven't really talked about it much. So, in addition to the Artemis program with NASA, Blue is doing its own lander program. Can you describe it? There's a sexy picture on Instagram with one of them. Is it the MK1? I guess.
Yeah, the Mark One.
Yeah.
The picture is me with Bill Nelson, the
Yeah.
NASA administrator.
Just to clarify, the lander is the sexy thing about the Instagram. You really want to
I
clarify
know it's
that?
not me. I know it was either the lander or Bill.
Okay. Hey, I love
Thank you
Bill,
for
but yeah,
clarifying.
okay.
The Mark One lander is designed to take 3,000 kilograms to the surface of the moon, cargo, expendable cargo. It's an expendable lander, lands on the moon, stays there, take 3,000 kilograms to the surface. It can be launched on a single New Glenn flight, which is very important. So it's a relatively simple architecture, just like the human landing system lander called the Mark II. Mark One is also fueled with liquid hydrogen, and which is for high energy missions like landing on the surface of the moon. The high specific impulse of hydrogen is a very big advantage. The disadvantage of hydrogen has always been that since it's such a deep cryogen, it's not storable. So it's constantly boiling off, and you're losing propellant because it's boiling off. And so what we're doing as part of our lunar program is developing solar powered cryocoolers that can actually make hydrogen a storable propellant for deep space. And that's a real game changer. It's a game changer for any high energy mission. So to the moon, but to the outer planets, to Mars, everywhere.
So the idea with Mark One, both Mark One and Mark Two, is the New Glenn can carry it from the surface of Earth to the surface of the moon.
Exactly. So the Mark One is expendable. The lunar lander we're developing for NASA, the Mark II lander, that's part of the Artemis program. They call it the sustaining lander program. So that lander is designed to be reusable. It can land on the surface of the moon in a single stage configuration and then take off. So if you look at the Apollo program, the lunar lander in Apollo was really two stages. It would land on the surface, and then it would leave the descent stage on the surface of the moon, and only the ascent stage would go back up into lunar orbit where it would rendezvous with the command module. Here, what we're doing is we have a single stage lunar lander that carries down enough propellant so that it can bring the whole thing back up so that it can be reused over and over. And the point of doing that, of course, is to reduce cost so that you can make lunar missions more affordable over time, that's one of NASA's big objectives, because this time the whole point of Artemis is go back to the moon, but this time to stay. So, back in the Apollo program, we went to the moon 6 times and then ended the program, and it really was too expensive to continue.
And so there's a few questions there, but one is, how do you stay on the moon? What ideas do you have about like a sustaining life where a few folks can stay there for prolonged periods of time?
Well, one of the things we're working on is using lunar resources like lunar regolith to manufacture commodities and even solar cells on the surface of the moon. We've already built a solar cell that is completely made from lunar regolith simulant, and this solar cell is only about 7% power efficient, so it's very inefficient compared to the more advanced solar cells that we make here on Earth. But if you can figure out how to make a practical solar cell factory that you can land on the surface of the moon, and then the raw material for those solar cells is simply lunar regolith, then you can just continue to churn out solar cells on the surface of the moon, have lots of power on the surface of the moon. That will make it easier for people to live on the moon. Similarly, we're working on extracting oxygen from lunar regolith. So lunar regolith by weight has a lot of oxygen in it. It's bound very tightly, as oxides with other elements, and so you have to separate the oxygen, which is very energy intensive. So that also could work together with the solar cells. But if you can, and then ultimately, we may be able to find practical quantities of ice in the permanently shadowed craters on the poles of the moon. And we know there is ice water in those, or water ice in those craters. And we know that we can break that down with electrolysis into hydrogen and oxygen. And then you'd not only have oxygen, but you'd also have a very good high efficiency propellant fuel in hydrogen. So there's a lot we can do to make the moon more sustainable over time. But the very first step, the kind of gate that all of that has to go through, is we need to be able to land cargo and humans on the surface of the moon at an acceptable cost.
To fast forward a little bit, is there any chance Jeff Bezos steps foot on the moon and on Mars? One or the other or both?
It's very unlikely. I think it's probably something that gets done by future generations by the time it
Right.
gets to me. I think in my lifetime, that's probably going to be done by professional astronauts.
Mhm.
Sadly, I
Yeah.
would love to sign up for that mission. So don't count me out yet, Lex. Give me a
Yeah.
fighting shot here,
Yeah.
maybe. But I think if we are placing reasonable bets on such a thing in my lifetime, that will continue to be done by professional astronauts
Yeah. So these are risky, difficult missions.
and probably missions that require a lot of training. You are going there for a very specific purpose to do something. We're going to be able to do a lot on the moon too with automation. So, in terms of setting up these factories and doing all that, we're sophisticated enough now with automation that we probably don't need humans to tend those factories and machines. So there's a lot that's going to be done in both modes.
So I have to ask the bigger picture question about the two companies pushing humanity forward out towards the stars, Blue Origin and SpaceX. Are you competitors, collaborators? Which and to what degree?
Well, I would say, just like the internet is big and there are lots of winners at all scale levels. I mean, there are half a dozen giant companies that, the internet has made, but there are a bunch of medium-sized companies and a bunch of small companies, all successful, all with profit streams, all driving great customer experiences. That's what we want to see in space.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of dynamism. And space is big. There's room for a bunch of winners, and it's going to happen at all scale levels. And so, SpaceX is going to be successful for sure. I want Blue Origin to be successful, and I hope there are another, 5 companies right behind us.
But, I spoke to Elon a few times recently about you, about Blue Origin, and he was very positive about you as a person and very supportive of all the efforts you've been leading at Blue. What's your thoughts? You worked with a lot of leaders at Amazon, at Blue. What's your thoughts about Elon as a human being and a leader?
Well, I don't really know Elon very well. I know his public persona, but I also know you can't know anyone by their public persona. It's impossible. I mean, you may think you do, but I guarantee you don't. So I don't really know. You know Elon way better than I do, Lex. But um, in terms of his judging by the results, he must be a very capable leader. There's no way you could have Tesla and SpaceX without being a capable leader. It's impossible.
Yeah, I hope you guys hang out sometimes, shake hands, and sort of have a kind of friendship that would inspire just the entirety of humanity. Because what you're doing is like one of the big, grand challenges ahead for humanity.
Well, I agree with you, and I think in a lot of these endeavors, we're very like-minded.
Yeah.
So I think I'm not saying we're identical, but I think we're very like-minded, and so I love that idea.
All right, going back to sexy pictures on your Instagram, there's a video of you from the early days of Amazon giving a tour of your quote sort of offices. I think your dad is holding the camera.
He is, yeah,
Okay.
I know, yes. This is one with the giant orange extension cord, and yeah.
And you're like explaining the genius of the extension cord and how there's a desk and the CRT monitor and sort of that's where all the magic happens. I forget what your dad said, but this is like the the center of it all. So what was it like? What was going through your mind at that time? You left a good job in New York and took this leap. Were you excited? Were you scared?
So excited and scared, anxious. Thought the odds of success were low. Told all of our early investors that I thought there was a 30% chance of success. I mean, by which I just meant getting your money back, not like not what actually happened. Because that's the truth. Every startup company is unlikely to work. It's helpful to be in reality about that. But that doesn't mean you can't be optimistic. So you kind of have to have this duality in your head. Like on the one hand, you know what the baseline statistics say about startup companies, and on the other hand, you have to ignore all of that and just be 100% sure it's going to work. And you're doing both things at the same time. You're holding that contradiction in your head. But it was so exciting. I love every from 1994 when the company was founded to 1995 when we opened our doors, all the way until today. I find Amazon so exciting, and that doesn't mean it's like full of pain, full of problems. It's like there's so many things that need to be resolved and worked and made better, and etc. But on balance, it's so fun. It's such a privilege. It's been such a joy. I feel so grateful that I've been part of that journey. It's just been incredible.
So in some sense, you don't want a single day of comfort. You've written about this many times. We'll talk about your writing, which I would highly recommend people read, and just the letters to shareholders. So you wrote explaining the idea of day one thinking. I think you first wrote about it in 97 letters to shareholders. Then you also, in a way, wrote about, sad to say, is your last letter to shareholders as CEO. And you said that day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that is why it's always day one. Can you explain this day one thing? This is a really powerful way to describe the beginning and the journey of Amazon.
It's really a very simple and I think age-old idea about renewal and rebirth, and like every day is day one. Every day you're deciding what you're going to do, and you are not trapped by what you were or who you were or any self-consistency. Self-consistency even can be a trap. And so day one thinking is kind of, we start fresh every day and we get to make new decisions every day about invention, about customers, about how we're going to operate, what our even as deeply as what our principles are. We can go back to that. It turns out we don't change those very often, but we change them occasionally. And when we work on programs at Amazon, we often make a list of tenets, and the tenets are kind of, they're not principles. They're a little more tactical than principles, but it's kind of the main ideas that we want this program to embody, whatever those are. And one of the things that we do is we put, these are the tenets for this program, and then in parentheses, we always put, unless you know a better way. Mm-hmm. And that idea, unless you know a better way, is so important because you never want to get trapped by dogma. You never want to get trapped by history. It doesn't mean you discard history or ignore it. There's so much value in what has worked in the past, but you can't be blindly following what you've done. And that's the heart of day one. You're always starting fresh.
And to the question of how to fend off day two, you said such a question can't have a simple answer, as you're saying. There will be many elements, multiple paths, and many traps. I don't know the whole answer, but I may know bits of it. Here's a starter pack of essentials. Maybe others come to mind. For day one, defense. Customer obsession, a skeptical view of proxies, the eager adoption of external trends, and high velocity decision making. So we talked about high velocity decision making. That's more difficult than it sounds. So maybe you can pick one that stands out to you as you can comment on. Eager adoption of external trends, high velocity decision making, skeptical view of proxies. How do you fight off day two?
Well, I'll talk about, because I think it's the one that is maybe in some ways the hardest to understand, is the skeptical view of proxies. One of the things that happens in business, probably anything where you have an ongoing program and something is underway for a number of years, is you develop certain things that you're managing to, like, let's say the typical case would be a metric. And that metric isn't the real underlying thing. And so, maybe the metric is efficiency metric around customer contacts per unit sold or something. Like if you sell 1 million units, how many customer contacts do you get? Or how many returns do you get? And so on and so on. And so what happens is a little bit of a kind of inertia sets in where somebody a long time ago invented that metric. And they invented that metric. They decided we need to watch for, customer returns per unit sold as an important metric. But they had a reason why they chose that metric, the person who invented that metric and decided it was worth watching. And then fast forward 5 years, that metric is the proxy.
Mm-hmm. The proxy for truth, I guess.
The proxy for truth, the proxy for customer, let's say in this case, it's a proxy for customer happiness. Yeah. But that metric is not actually customer happiness. It's a proxy for customer happiness. The person who invented the metric understood that connection. 5 years later, a kind of inertia can set in and you forget the truth behind why you were watching that metric in the first place. And the world shifts a little. Yeah. And now that proxy isn't as valuable as it used to be, or it's missing something. And you have to be on alert for that. You have to know, okay, I don't really care about this metric. I care about customer happiness. And this metric is worth putting energy into and following and improving and scrutinizing only in so much as it actually affects customer happiness. And so you got to constantly be on guard. And it's very, very common. This is a nuanced problem. It's very common, especially in large companies, that they are managing to metrics that they don't really understand. They don't really know why they exist. And the world may have shifted out from under them a little. And the metrics are no longer as relevant as they were when somebody 10 years earlier invented the metric.
That is a nuance, but that's a big problem, right?
It's a huge
There's
problem.
something so compelling to have a nice metric to try to optimize.
Yes. And by the way, you do need metrics.
Yes, you do.
You can't ignore them. You want them, but you just have to be constantly on guard. This is, a way to slip into day two thinking would be to manage your business to metrics that you don't really understand. And you're not really sure why they were invented in the first place. And you're not sure they're still as relevant as they used to be.
What does it take to be the guy or gal who brings up the point that this proxy might be outdated? I guess what does it take to have a culture that enables that in the meeting? Because that's a very uncomfortable thing to bring up at a meeting. We all showed up here. It's a Friday.
This is you have just asked $1 million question. So this is what if I generalize what you're asking, you're talking in general about truth telling.
Yeah.
And we humans are not really truth seeking animals. We are social animals.
Yeah, we are.
And, take you back in time 10,000 years and you're in a small village. If you go along to get along, you can survive. You can procreate. If you're the village truth teller, you might get clubbed to death in the middle of the night. Truths are often, they don't want to be heard because important truths can be uncomfortable. They can be awkward. They can be exhausting.
Impolite.
Yes.
All that kind of stuff.
Challenging.
Yeah.
They can make people defensive, even if that's not the intent. But any high-performing organization, whether it's a sports team, a business, a political organization, an activist group, I don't care what it is, any high-performing organization has to have mechanisms and a culture that supports truth-telling. One of the things you have to do is you have to talk about that. And you have to talk about the fact that it takes energy to do that. And you have to talk to people. You have to remind people it's okay that it's uncomfortable. You have to literally tell people it's not what we're designed to do as humans. It's not really, it's kind of a side effect. We can do that, but it's not how we survive. We mostly survive by being social animals and being cordial and cooperative. And that's really important. And so there's science is all about truth telling. It's actually a very formal mechanism for trying to tell the truth. And even in science, you find that it's hard to tell the truth. Right? Even, you're supposed to have a hypothesis and test it and find data and reject the hypothesis and so on. It's not easy.
But even in science, there's like the senior scientists and the junior scientists.
Correct.
And then there's a hierarchy of humans where somehow seniority matters in the scientific process, which it
and that's
not.
True inside companies too. Yeah. And so you want to set up your culture so that the most junior person can overrule the most senior person if they have data. And that really is about trying to, there are little things you can do. So for example, in every meeting that I attend, I always speak last. And I know from experience that, if I speak first, even very strong-willed, highly intelligent, high judgment participants in that meeting will wonder, well, if Jeff thinks that, I came in this meeting thinking one thing, but maybe I'm not right. And so you can do little things like if you're the most senior person in the room, go last. Let everybody else go first. In fact, ideally, is try to have the most junior person go first and the second, then try to go in order of seniority. So that you can hear everyone's opinion in a kind of unfiltered way. Because we really do. We actually literally change our opinions. If somebody who you really respect says something, it makes you change your mind a little.
So you're saying implicitly or explicitly give permission for people to have a strong opinion, that as long as it's backed by data.
Yes, and sometimes it can even, by the way, a lot of our most powerful truths turn out to be hunches. They turn out to be based on anecdotes. Yeah. They're intuition based, and sometimes you don't even have strong data. but you may know the person well enough to trust their judgment. You may feel yourself leaning in. It may resonate with a set of anecdotes you have, and then you may be able to say, something about that feels right. Let's go collect some data on that. Let's try to see if we can actually know whether it's right. But for now, let's not disregard it because it feels right. You can also fight inherent bias. There's an optimism bias. Like if there are two interpretations of a new set of data, and one of them is happy and one of them is unhappy, it's a little dangerous to jump to the conclusion that the happy interpretation is right. You may want to sort of compensate for that human bias of looking for, trying to find the silver lining and say, look, that might be good, but I'm going to go with it's bad for now until we're sure.
So speaking of happiness bias, data collection, and anecdotes, you have to. How's that for a transition? You have to tell me the story of the call you made, the customer service call you made to demonstrate a point about wait times.
Yeah, this is very early in the history of Amazon,
Yes.
and we were going over a weekly business review and a set of documents, and I have a saying, which is when the data and the anecdotes disagree, the anecdotes are usually right. And and it doesn't mean you just slavishly go follow the anecdotes. Then it means you go examine the data, because the data, and it's usually not that the data is being miscollected. It's usually that you're not measuring the right thing. And so, if you have a bunch of customers complaining about something, and at the same time, your metrics look like they shouldn't be complaining, um, you should doubt the metrics. And an early example of this was we had metrics that showed that our customers were waiting, I think, less than, I don't know, 60 seconds when they called a 1-800 number to get, phone customer service. The wait time was supposed to be less than 60 seconds. But we had a lot of complaints that it was longer than that. And anecdotally, it seemed longer than that. Like, I would call customer service myself. And so one day we're in a meeting, we're going through the WBR and the weekly business review, and we get to this metric in the deck. And the guy who leads customer service is to fit in the metric. And I said, okay, let's call. And I picked up the phone and I dialed the 1-800 number and called customer service. And we just waited in silence for the.
What did it turn out to be? Like
Oh, it was
minutes?
really long, more than 10 minutes, I think.
Oh wow.
I mean, it was many minutes. And so, it dramatically
Yeah.
made the point that something was wrong with the data collection. We weren't measuring the right thing. And that, set off a whole chain of events where we started measuring it right. And that's an example, by the way, of truth telling. Is like, that's an uncomfortable thing to do.
Yeah.
But you have to seek truth even when it's uncomfortable, and you have to get people's attention, and they have to buy into it, and they have to get energized around really fixing things.
So that speaks to the obsession with the customer experience. So one of the defining aspects of your approach to Amazon is just being obsessed with making customers happy. I think companies sometimes say that, but Amazon is really obsessed with that. I think there's something really profound to that, which is seeing the world through the eyes of the customer, like the customer experience, the human
Truly.
being that's using the product, that's enjoying the product, like what they're like the subtle little things that make up their experience. Like, how do you optimize those?
This is another really good and kind of deep question, because there are big things that are really important to manage, and then there are small things internally into Amazon. We call them paper cuts. So we're always working on the big things. Like if you ask me, and most of the energy goes into the big things, as it should. So, and you can identify the big things, and I would encourage anybody, if anybody listening to this is an entrepreneur, has a small business, whatever, um, you know, think about the things that are not going to change over 10 years. And those are probably the big things. So like I know in our retail business at Amazon, 10 years from now, customers are still going to want low prices. I know they're still going to want fast delivery, and I just know they're still going to want big selection. So it's impossible to imagine a scenario where 10 years from now, where a customer says, I love Amazon, I just wish the prices were a little higher. Or I love Amazon, I just wish you delivered a little more slowly. So when you identify the big things, you can tell they're worth putting energy into because they're stable in time. Okay. But you're asking about something a little different, which is in every customer experience, there are those big things. And by the way, it's astonishingly hard to focus even on just the big things. So even though they're obvious, they're really hard to focus on. But in addition to that, there are all these little tiny customer experience deficiencies. And we call those paper cuts. And we make long lists of them. And then we have dedicated teams that go fix paper cuts, because the teams working on the big issues never get to the paper cuts. They never work their way down the list to get to, they're working on big things as they should and as you want them to. And so you need special teams who are charged with fixing paper cuts.
Where would you put on the paper cut spectrum the buy now with one click button, which is I think pretty genius. So to me, like, okay, my interaction with things I love on the internet. There's things I do a lot. I may be representing a regular human. I would love for those things to be frictionless. For example, booking airline tickets. Just saying, but it's buying a thing with one click, making that experience frictionless, intuitive, all aspects of that. Like that just fundamentally makes my life better. Not just in terms of efficiency, in terms of some kind of
Cognitive load.
yeah, cognitive load and peace, inner peace and happiness. But first of all, buying stuff is a pleasant experience. Having enough money to buy a thing and then buying it is a pleasant experience. And like having pain around that is somehow just you're ruining a beautiful experience. And I guess all I'm saying as a person who loves good ideas is that a paper cut a solution to a paper cut?
Yes. So it's probably that particular thing is probably a solution to a number of paper cuts. So if you go back and look at our order pipeline and how people shopped on Amazon before we invented one-click shopping, there were there was more friction. There was a whole series of paper cuts, and that invention eliminated a bunch of paper cuts. And I think you're absolutely right, by the way, that when you come up with something like one-click shopping, again, this is like so ingrained in people now. I'm impressed that you even notice it. I mean, most people,
Every time I click the button,
most
I
people never
a surge of
notice.
happiness.
There is in the perfect invention for the perfect moment in the perfect context, there is real beauty.
Yeah.
It is actual beauty, and it feels good. It's emotional. It's emotional for the inventor. It's emotional for the team that builds it. It's emotional for the customer. It's a big deal, and you can feel those things.
But to keep coming up with that idea, with those kinds of ideas, I guess is the day one thinking effort.
Yeah, and you need a big group of people who feel that kind of satisfaction with creating that kind of beauty.
There's a lot of books written about you. There's a book, Invent and Wander, where Walter Isaacson does an intro, and it's mostly collected writings of yours. I've read that. I also recommend people check out the Founders podcast. That covers you a lot, and it does different analysis of different business advice you've given over the years. I bring all that up because I saw that there a mention that you said that books are an antidote for short attention spans, and I forget how it was phrased, but that when you were thinking about the Kindle, that you're thinking about how technology changes us. Yeah,
We co-evolve
yeah,
with our tools. So, we invent new tools, and then our tools change us.
which is fascinating to think about.
It goes in a circle.
And there's some aspect, even just inside business, where you don't just make the customer happy, but you also have to think about like where is this going to take humanity if you zoom out a bit.
100%. And you can feel your brains are plastic, and you can feel your brain getting reprogrammed. I remember the first time this happened to me was when Tetris first came on the scene. I'm sure anybody who's been a game player has this experience where you close your eyes to lay down to go to sleep, and you see all the little blocks moving, and you're kind of rotating them in your mind, and you can just tell as you walk around the world that you have rewired your brain to play Tetris. But that happens with everything. And so, one of I think, we still have yet to see the full repercussions of this, I fear. But I think one of the things that we've done online, and largely because of social media, is we have trained our brains to be really good at processing super short form content. And your podcast flies in the face of this. You do these long format things, and reading books is a long format thing, and we all do more of if something is convenient, we do more of it. And so when you make tools, we carry around we carry around in our pocket a phone, and one of the things that phone does, for the most part, is it is an attention shortening device, because most of the things we do on our phone shorten our attention spans. And I'm not even going to say we know for sure that that's bad, but I do think it's happening. It's one of the ways we're co-evolving with that tool. But I think it's important to spend some of your time and some of your life doing long attention span things.
Yeah, I think you've spoken about the value in your own life of focus, of singular focus on a thing for prolonged periods of time, and that's certainly what books do, and that's certainly what that piece of technology does. But I bring all that up to ask you about another piece of technology, AI, that has the potential to have various trajectories to have an impact on human civilization. How do you think AI will change us?
You're talking about, generative AI, large language models, things like ChatGPT and its soon successors, and um, these are incredibly powerful technologies. To believe otherwise is to bury your head in the sand. Soon to be even more powerful. Um, it, it's interesting to me that that large language models in their current form are not inventions; they're discoveries. The telescope was an invention, but looking through it at Jupiter, knowing that it had moons, was a discovery.
Mhm.
Like, my God, it has moons. And that's what Galileo did. And so this is closer on that spectrum of invention. We know exactly what happens with a 787. It's an engineered object. We designed it. We know how it behaves. We don't want any surprises. Large language models are much more like discoveries. We're constantly getting surprised by their capabilities. They're not really engineered objects. Um, then, you have this debate about whether they're going to be good for humanity or bad for humanity. Um, you know, even specialized AI can be very bad for humanity. I mean, it's just just regular machine learning models that can make certain weapons of war that could be incredibly destructive and very powerful. And they're not general AIs; they could just be very smart weapons. Um, and so we have to think about all of those things. I'm very optimistic about this. So even in the face of all this uncertainty, my own view is that these powerful tools are much more likely to help us and save us even than they are to, on balance, hurt us and destroy us. I think, we humans have a lot of ways of, we can make ourselves go extinct. These things may help us not do that. So they may actually save us. So the people who are, overly concerned, in my view, overly concerned, it's a valid debate. I think that I think that they may be missing part of the equation, which is how helpful they could be in making sure we don't destroy ourselves. I don't know if you saw the movie Oppenheimer,
Mhm.
but to me, first of all, I loved the movie, and I thought the best part of the movie is this bureaucrat played by Robert Downey Jr., who, some people I've talked to think that's the most boring part of the movie. I thought it was the most fascinating because what's going on here is you realize we have invented these awesome, destructive, powerful technologies called nuclear weapons, and they are managed. And we humans are we're not really capable of wielding those weapons.
Yeah.
Where that's what he represented in that movie is here's this guy who is uh, just he wrongly thinks he's like being so petty. He thinks that he said something that Oppenheimer said something bad to Einstein about him. They didn't talk about him at all, as you find out in the final scene of the movie. And yet he spent his career trying to be vengeful and petty. And that's the problem. We as a species are not really sophisticated enough and mature enough to handle these technologies. And so, and by the way, before you get to general AI and the possibility of AI having agency, and there's a lot of things that would have to happen, but there's so much benefit that's going to come from these technologies in the meantime, even before they're, general AI in terms of better medicines and better tools to develop more technologies and so on. So I think it's an incredible moment to be alive and to witness the transformations that are going to happen. How quickly it'll happen, no one knows. But over the next 10 years and 20 years, I think we're going to see really remarkable advances. And I personally am very excited about it.
First of all, really interesting to say that it's discoveries that it's true that we don't know the limits of what's possible with the current language models,
We don't.
and like it could be a few tricks and hacks here and there that open doors to whole entire new possibilities.
We do know that humans are doing something different from these models, in part because we're so power efficient. The human brain does remarkable things, and it does it on about 20 watts of power. And the AI techniques we use today use many kilowatts of power to do equivalent tasks. So there's something interesting about the way the human brain does this. And also, we don't need as much data. So like self-driving cars they have to drive billions and billions of miles to try and to learn how to drive, and your average 16-year-old figures it out with many fewer miles. So there are still some tricks, I think, that we have yet to learn. I don't think we've learned the last trick. I don't think it's just a question of scaling things up. But what's interesting is that just scaling things up, and I put just in quotes because it's actually hard to scale things up, but just scaling things up also appears to pay huge dividends.
Yeah, and there's some more nuanced aspect about human beings that's interesting if it's able to accomplish, like being truly original and novel, to large language models being able to come up with some truly new ideas. That's one, and the other one is truth. It seems that large language models are very good at sounding like they're saying a true thing, but they don't require or often have a grounding in sort of a mathematical truth. It basically is a very good bullshitter. So if there's not enough data, if there's not enough sort of data in the training data about a particular topic, it's just going to concoct accurate sounding narratives, which is a very fascinating problem to try to solve. How do you get language models to infer what is true and not, to sort of introspect?
Yeah, they need to be taught to say, I don't know, more often.
Yeah.
And I know several humans who could be taught that as well.
Sure. And then the other stuff, because you're still a bit involved in the Amazon side with the AI things, the other open question is what kind of products are created from this?
Oh, so many.
Yeah.
I mean, just to, we have Alexa and Echo, and Alexa has, hundreds of millions of installed base, inputs. And so there's Alexa everywhere. And guess what? Alexa is about to get a lot smarter.
Yeah.
And so that's really, from a product point of view, that's super exciting.
There's so many opportunities there.
So many opportunities. Shopping assistant, like all that stuff is amazing. In AWS, we're building Titan, which is our foundational model. We're also building Bedrock, which our corporate clients at AWS, our enterprise clients, they want to be able to use these powerful models with their own corporate data without accidentally contributing their corporate data to that model.
Yes.
And so those are the tools we're building for them with Bedrock. So there's tremendous opportunity here.
Yeah, the security, the privacy, all those things are fascinating, of how to, because so much value can be gained by training on private data, but you want to keep this secure. It's a fascinating technical problem.
This is a very challenging technical problem, and it's one that we're, making progress on and dedicated to solving for our customers.
Do you think there will be a day when humans and robots, maybe Alexa, have a romantic relationship, like in the her?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at
brainstorming products here,
if you look at the spectrum of human variety and what people like, sexual variety.
Yes.
There are people who like everything. So the answer to your question has to be yes.
Okay.
I don't know.
I guess I'm asking
I don't know
when.
how widespread that will be.
All right.
But it will happen.
I was just asking when for a friend, but it's all right. So, moving on. Next question. What's a perfectly
so many opportunities. Shopping assistant, like all that stuff is amazing. In AWS, we're building Titan, which is our foundational model. We're also building Bedrock, which our corporate clients at AWS, our enterprise clients, they want to be able to use these powerful models with their own corporate data without accidentally contributing their corporate data to that model.
Yes.
And so those are the tools we're building for them with Bedrock. So there's tremendous opportunity here.
Yeah, the security, the privacy, all those things are fascinating, of how to, because so much value can be gained by training on private data, but you want to keep this secure. It's a fascinating technical problem.
This is a very challenging technical problem, and it's one that we're, making progress on and dedicated to solving for our customers.
Do you think there will be a day when humans and robots, maybe Alexa, have a romantic relationship, like in the her?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at
brainstorming products here,
if you look at the spectrum of human variety and what people like, sexual variety.
Yes.
There are people who like everything. So the answer to your question has to be yes.
Okay.
I don't know.
I guess I'm asking
I don't know
when.
how widespread that will be.
All right.
But it will happen.
I was just asking when for a friend, but it's all right. So, moving on. Next question. What's a perfectly productive day in the life of Jeff Bezos?
That will be.
All right.
But it will happen.
I was just asking when for a friend, but it's all right. So, moving on. Next question. What's a perfectly productive day in the life of Jeff Bezos? You're one of the most productive humans in the world.
Well, I first of all, I get up in the morning and I putter. I like have a coffee.
Can you define putter?
Just like I slowly move around. I'm not as productive as you might think I am. I mean, because I do believe in wandering, and I read my phone for a while. I read newspapers for a while. I chat with Lauren. I drink my first coffee. So I move pretty slowly in the first couple of hours. I get up early, just naturally, and then you know I exercise most days, and most days it's not that hard for me. Some days it's really hard, and I do it anyway. I don't want to, and it's painful, and I'm like, why am I here? And I don't want to do.
I mean, why am I here at the gym?
Why am I here at the gym? Why don't I do something else? It's not always easy.
What's your source of motivation in those moments?
I know that I'll feel better later if I do it. And so like the real source of motivation, I can tell the days when I skip it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite as alert. I don't feel as good. And then there's harder motivations. It's longer term. You want to be healthy as you age. You want health span. You want ideally, you want to be healthy and moving around when you're 80 years old. And so there's a lot of but that kind of motivation is so far in the future, it can be very hard to work in the second.
Yeah.
So thinking about the fact I'll feel better in about 4 hours if I do it now, I'll have more energy for the rest of my day and so on and so on.
What's your exercise routine? Just to linger on that. How much you curl? I mean, what are we talking about here? That's all I do at the gym. So
my routine, on a good day, I do about half an hour of cardio and I do about 45 minutes of weightlifting, resistance training of some kind, mostly weights. I have a trainer who, I love, who pushes me, which is really helpful. I'll be like, he'll say, Jeff, do you think can we go up on that weight a little bit? And I'll think about it and I'll be like, no, I don't think so. And he'll look at me and say, yeah, I think you can. And of course he's right.
Yeah, of
and
course.
so it's helpful to have somebody push you a little bit.
But almost